This video is made as spoiler-free as possible. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was a long-anticipated game for me. For years, we didn't even know if a sequel was being made, until they finally revealed it in 2024. When I started my playthrough of the first game, I was honestly a bit skeptical. The game looked buggy, clunky, and just extremely brutal. But after playing the first 10 or so hours, I noticed how I gradually fell more and more in love with it. Fast forward to about 100 hours of in-game time, and I'd finished the first one and all of its DLC. After this, I was anxiously awaiting more. Today, we arrive at where I am with the sequel, having finished every side quest, the main story, and finally ready to put my experience into words. If you tried the first game and wasn't impressed, maybe you're on the fence about trying the sequel, let me try to convince you that it deserves a chance and explain why Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is an RPG masterpiece. Now, let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. The combat in both games is notorious for being clunky and extremely hard, and a lot of people stopped playing because of it. Let me tell you right away that if you hated the combat in the first game, then you'll probably do so in KCD 2 as well. Like in the first game, the combat is centered around 1v1 fights, and you are given different directions to attack the enemy. This automatic lock-on is still a bit clunky in KCD 2 and can make switching the lock-on to a different enemy a bit annoying, especially when you're fighting a lot of people. In order to leave a battle, for example, you basically have to pull your aim aggressively away from the enemy to stop the lock-on. The combat system has been refined and polished a bit since the first game, but it is largely the same. It is more responsive, animations feel smoother, and enemies seem a little less scripted than in the first game. The first one had 5 attack directions, while the sequel has reduced it to 4. In KCD 1, you had 2 different attack buttons, slash and stab. This meant that you could, for example, do stabbing attacks with a mace, which didn't really make a lot of sense. But in KCD 2, all basic attacks are, generally speaking, slashing attacks. And the variety in these attacks mostly stem from the different multi-hit combos you can do. The attacks also mostly only make sense for the weapon you're using. Warhorse, the developer, wanted to lower the skill ceiling for the combat, and it really shows in KCD 2. Blocking and perfect parries feel more forgiving and is generally more responsive. You can still use the master strikes like in KCD 1, but you can't spam it as aggressively, and they can even be countered in KCD 2. Enemies are also a bit smarter in that they will notice more of your pattern when fighting. This means that you have to basically vary your attacks more, or the enemy will punish you for it. The combat system is very similar in terms of weak points. If you slash an enemy with a sword towards an exposed part of their armor, that will do more damage. If you use a heavy weapon against a shield, you can straight up just destroy the shield. Now, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I honestly don't feel like this has changed much. But it's worth noting that it's still a thing in the sequel. KCD 2 introduces us to 2 new ranged weapons, the crossbow and primitive guns. Crossbows are, from what I understand, just generally more powerful than bows, and guns are extremely inaccurate and take forever to reload. The guns are mostly useful at close range, but again has the disadvantage of taking forever to reload. However, they can actually be used as a psychological tool to scare away enemies in certain situations. Some enemies will straight up just flee when faced with a gun, or if you shot their general. Stealth has also evolved for the better. In KCD 1, stealth kills were mostly just a dice roll based on your skill versus the enemy, and made stealth kills, especially early on, really hard. In KCD 2, it is changed to being timing based instead and is generally more forgiving. When trying to knock someone out or stealth kill them, you'll get this blue attack icon that needs to be timed by clicking the attack button. If you miss, you might still kill the enemy, but the target will scream out, alerting nearby enemies. Overall, the combat aspects of KCD 2 have largely improved upon the first game, and I think that a lot of new players will find it a lot more forgiving and easier to handle. So, like in the first game, KCD 2 also has a handful of minigames for the various actions you can perform. Most are pretty similar to the previous game, some have changed a bit, and some are brand new. I'll first talk about the most important ones before quickly looking at other minor minigames. The pickpocketing system returns as basically the same system as in KCD 1. I'm not sure, but it feels like the same system, only a bit less RNG based. You have a wheel that you can move through, and based on the time you accumulated when trying to pickpocket, that is the amount of time that you have to loot them. If you can't get out in time, you're caught. When choosing an item, the time is lessened and you have less time to escape. In the first game, it felt way too random, and especially early on, you could instantly fail a pickpocket on someone sleeping, solely based on RNG. This feels a lot fairer in KCD2, but it doesn't appear to have changed all that much. I did a fair amount of pickpocketing in KCD2, but even at a higher level, I rarely found the risk to be worth the reward. The lockpicking system is basically the exact same as in KCD1. Especially early on, even easy locks are brutally hard. I've heard numerous complaints that on console, the lockpicking is impossible to perform because of the precision required being too hard on a controller. I played on PC and this problem is less pronounced, but still hard in the beginning. Oftentimes, the loot is also not even worth your trouble, but lockpicking everything you see will level up your skill, which will come in handy in future chests. A lot of chests later in the game will be easy to open and can provide you with some insane loot. They've also added blacksmithing. Warhorse initially wanted to add it in the first game, but felt that it wasn't done properly and decided to wait. This minigame is overall very useful. You have a list of recipes that you can buy from different vendors, and when crafting, you'll go through mostly the same loop. Grab a generic shape from a barrel, like an axe shape, sword shape, horseshoe shape, etc. Heat it up to the proper temperature, hammer it, reheat if needed, temper, and you're done. It's a cool minigame, but I wish there were more variations to it, because it becomes a bit stale and repetitive after a while. The list of what you can make is also a bit underwhelming. You can't create armors, arrows, bolts, bullets, horse armor, and so on. Lockpicks can be made indirectly when successfully creating other stuff, but I really wish the crafting list was bigger. Blacksmithing can be satisfying and a great way to earn money early on, because you can essentially make expensive products from cheap materials you buy from vendors. You also have an entirely new skill called craftsmanship, which is entirely dedicated to blacksmithing. To be honest, this skill tree felt kinda useless, but that might just be because of my playstyle. Alchemy also returns in KCD2, and feels a bit more refined. It follows the same principle with blacksmithing in that you have a list of craftables, and you can buy more recipes from vendors. When creating potions, you're essentially following the exact steps given to you in the recipe book. You need a base, water, wine, spirits or oil, and ingredients. These have to be followed to the letter, but with certain perks, you can make the process less sensitive to small errors, and also get better potions out of each craft. In KCD2, you can move the cauldron up or down from the flame, and also use the bellows for more intense boiling, but in the first game, you could only boil the content by using the bellows. I found that potion making in KCD2 was a bit easier and more lenient. You can also dry your herbs, which makes them never go bad, but the potion quality will be slightly worse when using dried ingredients. Alchemy is also a very useful skill because you can create tons of useful potions like savior schnapps for saving the game, marigold decoction for healing, gunpowder, different potions for poisoning people, and so on. Potions can also be sold, and there are skills to make potions sell for more groschen. In the first game, alchemy had a skill called auto brew, which enabled you to brew a potion without physically having to boil it, grind it, and so on. This doesn't appear to exist in KCD2, and it makes it more tedious. Overall, alchemy is definitely a good one. Oh, by the way, a side note on alchemy. In the first game, Henry is basically illiterate, so you have to finish a side quest to be able to read the recipe book. In KCD2, you obviously don't need this and just can go straight to creating potions. The dice minigame is also pretty similar to the first one. This is mostly for fun, and in a few rare instances, you can progress a quest by winning against an opponent. In KCD2, they also introduced something called badges, which can be used from everything like doubling your score to letting you change dice while rolling. The drinking skill can be synergized with the badges, which can let you use badges more than once in a match. Overall, it's just for fun. There's no skills related to it, and the money you can earn is mostly useful in the beginning. Other minigames includes the horse races, which I didn't really care for because they're hard, and a lot of the times you basically have to save before doing the race because your opponent is usually faster than you and you don't know the route. You can, however, earn some nice rewards, but I never really did them. There's also archery contests scattered about the world, which can be a nice way of leveling up your marksman skill, but this one too didn't use it that much. And lastly, the grinding wheel. The grinding wheel lets you sharpen your weapons, but here I generally just opted for the various repair kits you can buy from traders. So overall, there are some new systems, some older systems have been improved, and they're generally better than the first one. But especially for blacksmithing, it's really satisfying in the beginning, but the list of items you can craft is too small, and the minigame itself just becomes tedious after a while. The world of KCD2 is huge. around twice the size of the first game. Like with the first game, this one is also full of additional side quests and activities. One of the things that made the first game great was how alive the world felt. Characters felt alive, they had real individual struggles, their own routines. A farmer would actually spend most of his time farming before going to the nearest watering hole in the evening. When trading, you can't sell a sword to a housemaid because what's she supposed to do with a sword? You might meet a wandering merchant and think it was just a random generic encounter, only for that character to give you a chain of side quests relating to his profession. Going out after dark is way more dangerous compared to going out at broad daylight. You need to sleep, eat, and make sure you're not dirty. Being too tired or hungry has severe consequences, like less stamina, and if you're tired, your eyes will literally shut while you're walking around. And being dirty made people in the world react in disgust. If you were hammered while talking to someone, they might taunt you by telling you that you're a lightweight, or react in disgust of what a pathetic drunk you are. This was used brilliantly in the first game, and it gave the whole world an identity. It felt alive, and you could feel its personality. Everything made sense, your actions had real consequences, and every single character felt alive. This exact game design is also used extensively in KCD2, but to a bigger extent. Random encounters are even more frequent, feel way less generic, and there's tons of extra missions related to the random encounters in the sequel. There's also a ton of side quests scattered around both maps. Now, I don't want to spoil anything in this video, but there are quests in this game that seem small at first, but quickly sends you into a long chain of sub-quests, one of which took me over an hour in real time. Something both games does brilliantly is the progression of different skills. So in both games, you have a skill tree for all sorts of things. Alchemy, marksmanship, warfare, drinking, strength, and so on. Sure, you have skills, and Henry can get some nice benefits from leveling up and acquiring different skills, but what really shines in these games is that when you're leveling a skill, both you and Henry get better. When leveling Thievery, for example, lockpicking becomes easier because Henry gets better, but so do you. When you first start using a crossbow in KCD2, it wobbles all over the place and it's impossible to use. You have no idea where to place your aim, and when trying to shoot something, it just feels clunky and bad. The more you level up, the more stable his aim becomes, and you also become more accurate. This basically applies to all skills in the game. You get better at sword fighting, pulling off better combos. Henry gets stronger and you can do more and more. This synergy of both you and Henry really pulls you in. It gives you a sense of mastery that I can honestly only compare to games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. This style of progression is also extremely well tied into the world of KCD. Skills also just make sense. I mean, there's a skill that makes it so that when you're picking flowers off the ground, you'll gain a small amount of experience on strength, because Henry bends his knees and uses his legs to stand back up again. Everything ties together nicely and intelligently, and you always feel like you're learning something. So, praising the game is good and all, but we need to talk bugs and performance. I didn't play the first game at launch, but from what I've seen online, it was full of bugs. The first game was still buggy when I played it, but it was mostly just funny things like dialogue overlapping, characters clipping into each other, and some minor quest bugs. The performance in the first game was also a bit all over the place. In the wild, you'd have a pretty stable FPS, but entering cities like Ratai, and your frames plummeted. I've played KCD2 since launch day, and I can honestly say that it feels extremely polished and finished. The performance is generally really good, although there are some similarities from the first game. Crowds, for example, tanks your FPS in both games. In KCD2, there's a huge city called Kutenberg, and the FPS here can be downright horrible. In castle siege missions, where there might be like 20 plus NPCs around you, even though they're dead, your FPS will fall significantly. This didn't bother me too much, but if you're on weaker hardware, it's something to keep in mind. Bugs in KCD2 was also generally prevalent, but most of them are just minor annoyances. One of the bugs that kept repeating itself for me was characters clipping into each other. Mutt, Henry's dog, would clip all over the place, all the time. I also had this weird audio bug where people's voices sounded like they were in a cave. Now, this is an intended effect when you're actually in a mine or underground, but I noticed how this one kept happening on the surface. It would disappear after restarting the game though. KCD2 also seems to have a memory leak issue. Basically, the longer you play, the more unstable and worse performance you'll get. I rarely crashed, maybe 2 or 3 times over just north of 100 hours of playtime. There were some quest related bugs that downright locked you out of them. One quest, which requires Henry to cleanse different fireplaces in Trotsky Castle, was impossible to finish if you'd finished a certain main story mission first. The last fireplace was essentially locked because the door that led to it was inaccessible because of a previous main story mission. Other bugs I kept seeing was odd camera angles in cutscenes. Some quest markers on the map actually never had quests. For example, in Gutenberg, you'd see a character that was supposed to have a quest, but when you approached him or her, there were no dialogue options at all. Some missions that require sneaking around was kind of annoying because of NPCs reacting weirdly and noticing you too fast. Overall, there was a fair few instances of these types of bugs, but honestly, it was rarely anything too game-breaking, and in all cases, I could generally just work around them. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is an amazing game, and I can honestly say that this is the most fun I've had for a long time. It takes elements from the first one that worked well and vastly improves upon it. Everything feels more polished, bigger and better. Warhorse has been able to create a truly amazing game, and their passion for the craft really shines through. The voice actors for Henry and Hans have done a ton of live action promotion for the games, and they're both such wholesome people. Their relationship feels genuine, and the story they're telling is brilliantly crafted. Yes, there are bugs, performance issues here and there, and the overall experience is really hard in the beginning, but it's so worth it if you stick with it. If you're on the fence about this one, I really hope I've given you a bit of a reason to try it out, because it is truly a work of art, a true masterpiece. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for all the support and kind words I've gotten so far on my previous videos. You guys are awesome, and I love creating videos for you and sharing my passion for games and technology. If you like what I'm doing and want to watch more, please consider subscribing. With that, I'm Rolf, and I hope you have an amazing day.